Okay, so the next thing that we're going to, City Manager, Mr. Joyce?
Thank you, Mayor.
You bet.
I'd like to invite Fire Chief Scott Haberly down to the microphone as I advise you of the latest on the fire that occurred Friday morning at Wintersburg, Historic Wintersburg property. I would say, and I hate to have to say this, the event, the fire occurred Friday morning. The agenda went out Thursday night. I couldn't have anticipated, therefore, and properly noticed this on the agenda in a way that would allow you to ask questions and for us to talk about it. So in anticipation of, you've all been advised, of course, and asked me regularly about how we're doing out there on the arson investigation. But for those who may be tuning in, I've asked Chief Haberly to be as complete as possible so that we can anticipate questions that might be asked, and he'll hopefully answer those questions in his report. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Mayor and council members. As you know, on early Friday morning, we were dispatched to Warner and Nichols for a reported structure fire at the location. So when we arrived on scene, within about 5 minutes, we found a structure to the rear of the church at the location that was fully involved in fire. The location is surrounded by a fenced-off area for security. So our staff made what we refer to as forcible entry, cut through the fence in a couple different locations to make access. One of the first things that we did from a structure fire point is we looked at exposures, and the church was a direct exposure to the structure since it was fully involved. So we placed our initial hose lines in the first 2 minutes between the structure and the church and started working back away from that location to try to protect the church from having any fire activity in it. And in that first couple of minutes, we also started we had down power lines around the facility, which made it a little more complex. Those down power lines started additional grass and brush fires around the location as they were live power. So we had to work with Edison to get those shut off so that there wasn't any safety to firefighters as those lines are moving live at the location. In addition to that, we had about 28 firefighters on scene fighting the incident. It took almost an hour to fully extinguish the fire, and that gives you indication of how much fire was at that location when we arrived. Right around 10 o'clock, we met with the building inspector to talk about the structural integrity of the building. So now we have the fire mostly out. However, it's still burning in what we call overhaul stage. I mean, there's hidden fire and debris in the corners and the material, and it takes some time to get that fully extinguished. But the major knockdown of the fire is completed. So in consultation with the building official, with the incident commander, and our fire investigators, I gave my approval to use an excavator that Rainbow had at their location. We asked them to take the excavator, so that's what you would see is the claw, like an arm with a claw on the end, to move some of the material so we can finish overhaul on the facility. One of the main problems was the structural integrity of the facility was so much so that we couldn't put arson investigators inside, we couldn't put firefighters inside, and we couldn't really do a thorough search of the inside of the building to ensure that nobody was in there. And when we started working around the exterior of the building, it started to move. We started seeing it move and reported. So with that, we discussed it, I gave my approval, and we started using the excavator to pull the rest of the building kind of apart so that we could fully extinguish it. And we did this for a couple different reasons. One is we have something we refer to as rekindle, and it is something in these type of structures that is quite common. Yeah. Fire sits in a void or in a space that we don't find, and then 12 hours later it reignites. And with the church and that location, the vegetation management on the property, we felt that we had to really ensure that this entire building was out, extinguished, and done, because we don't want to come back 12 hours later and have the church on fire or something close to it again. We also needed to rule out that there wasn't anybody inside the building, which is something we couldn't do safely with the building in its current situation. Once we completed the overhaul and kind of went through that process, we were able to really, at that point, we started our investigation. That usually starts really at the beginning of the fire. We have on-duty fire investigation team. We have 2 to 3 firefighters per shift that are assigned. So when they get on scene, even though they're doing fire attack, they're still taking mental notes. They're working with PD. And as soon as we were able to break them from the incident, they met with the police department to start that investigation. And I think one of the things that, we're grateful that there wasn't any loss of life or anyone hurt at the location, and I'm really proud of the work they did. When you look at the location and the limitations of some of the challenges, our firefighters did an exceptional job of taking a very difficult fire and keeping it at the one structure that was involved and keeping the fire out of the church. And I think they did a great job at getting that done. And although we acknowledge the importance and respect the cultural significance of this location and where we're at. And I wanted to make sure that I ensured the community and the council that we are doing a robust and thorough fire investigation, and that we're going to continue that process over the next coming weeks. In addition, I wanted to follow up also that I had sent a notice out to all of you that we did have an unusual high degree of fire activity that week. We had a number of residential structure fires, which is very unusual for us. But I wanted to assure you that those fires, although tragic to the occupants and the residents in their home, however, they were unrelated. So those fires, there wasn't a commonality between all of it. It was just a very busy week for the fire department and somewhat tragic for some of our community. However, we didn't have anybody hurt. Firefighters weren't hurt, and they followed all the practices to get out of their homes. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Chief, for your insightful recap of what happened there. Does anyone have any questions of the chief? Okay. I actually was on Warner Avenue. I thought the fire engines got there really fast. We could see the smoke coming. And then as soon as they got there, I didn't realize there was a fence. I saw that later. But thank you for the job they did. I know, especially with the dried grass and old wood, it's like a fire starting to happen, right? Okay, I'm going to go move to the consent calendar, and that's for items 14 through 21.